Talking with Jerry.
Okay, here we go. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't subscribed. And if you are a subscriber, be sure to check the like button. Haven't done anything in a minute, but hey, I'm back. Got a lot of episodes I'll be uploading over the next week. So be sure to look out for those alerts if you are a subscriber. So yes, they're still telling and promoting lies. What am I talking about? Well, we're about to enter Women's History Month. I'm going to start off with a woman in this, and it's not per se a episode, though it's short on Black history. But here's the deal: I was in the supermarket just over the weekend, starting yesterday, Friday, and I came across this magazine. And in this magazine, as you can see the title, it talks about the West and how the American West was won. So I like history, any facet of American history, and even Western history is a big part of a time period in American history that I like. So I'm thumbing through this magazine, and it has pictures and short stories on, different parts of history in the American West. And as I'm going through it, I'm noticing that there's no Black person there at all. There's no Black frontiersmen or cowboys or soldiers or women. It's just full of all white people, about famous white people in the American West. But it's how the West was won and how the West was settled. And there's all these, as I said, pictures and short stories. It's a great piece of a magazine for history. But the question is, where are the Black people? So that's what I want to tackle here. Why were Black people left out of this magazine? And what was startling is there's a series of this magazine. It's not just this one. Here you'll see that there are several issues of this magazine that have been put out in the past. And you'll look at all the covers, and what do you see? Now, when I was growing up, as many people post baby boomers, a big thing on television was Western TV shows. So you had Rawhide, which Clint Eastwood came out of. You had Have Gun Will Travel, The Lone Ranger, Roy Rogers, Paladin. Wagon Train. There were all of these TV shows, and they were the most popular TV shows. And eventually you had a big show like Bonanza that people watched every evening for entertainment. Westerns were the big thing. Then in 1962, Hollywood had been making a lot of great Western movies with a guy, of course, named John Wayne. But they put together what was one of the biggest epic movies in all of Hollywood history. It was called How the West Was Won. And this movie was going to cover the whole period of American history from the frontiersmen going out west and exploring new lands, to the Civil War, to people going on rafts up and down the Mississippi, to people going out west and the races to settle places like Oklahoma, the fighting against Native Americans, the wagon trains, everything that had to go into building this country and its move west, expansion west the railroads, all the way into settling California and San Francisco was all covered. Now, in this movie, it was comprised of one of the greatest casts of all time. You had Henry Fonda, Gregory Peck, Debbie Reynolds, George Papard, who I just saw the other night in Breakfast at Tiffany's, great actor. Spencer Tracy's, if you've never seen him in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner with Sidney Poitier, great actor. Carl Malden, Robert Preston, Carol Baker, Richard Widmark, and of course, John Wayne, and Jimmy Stewart. So the cast for this movie is unbelievable. And as a young, I guess I wasn't a child, but you know, getting out of childhood, approaching my early teen years, my mother took me to see this movie, and I loved it because I loved Westerns, and I loved this was a movie about history. But you had all of these great actors of that time, the biggest actors, and not one black person is in the whole movie. There was not one notable black actor. So how could the West have been won without any black people? So let's just kind of dissect this for a minute here. So since it's Women's History Month, I'm going to start off with a woman named Stagecoach Mary. And stagecoaches used to take passengers west. It used to deliver mail. You had things like the Pony Express. And Stagecoach Mary was a black woman who rode on the stagecoaches. She had carried a shotgun, and she killed and chased many bandits from robbing stagecoaches. She delivered mail throughout the West and helped really settle the state of Montana, a black woman. You know, when you hear the term cowboy, do you know that 1 out of 4 cowboys were black men? So when you would see movies, even up to this day, that are made about, you know, taking the cattle from Texas on these cattle drives west, 1 out of 4 of the cowboys were black men. And that's where the name cowboy comes from. The cow hands who dealt with the cows on the cattle drives were white men. They called them cow hands. But because black men were referred to as boys, they were called cowboys. So that's where the term actually came from. You know, great characters like, some of you may not know, but there was a movie that was updated. It was a terrible movie too, by the way. The Lone Ranger. When I was growing up, that was a TV show, The Lone Ranger, and his horse, Hi-Yo Silver. And Kimosabe, his Indian partner. Well, the Lone Ranger character, fictional, was actually based on a black man, one of the greatest Western lawmen. His name was Bash Reeves. He arrested over 3,000 people, over 3,000 in his career. That's without telephones, that's without, you know, actual pictures, just drawings of who an outlaw might be. That's without any form of communication other than maybe, you know, telegraph. You know, you think of how people find people today, detectives even in a particular city. This guy was roaming throughout the West apprehending criminals, and he arrested over 3,000 of them and was one of the most feared lawmen of the West. Then you have Nat Love. Nat Love, also known as Deadwood Dick, was one of the greatest sharpshooters with a gun ever. I mean, he lived with the Indians. He sometimes had to fight Indians. He was friends with the famous outlaw Billy the Kid. And Nat Love had a reputation, like when you see in those cowboy movies, when somebody comes into town and everybody gets scared, or if he walks into what they used to call them saloons back then, which would be like a bar. Soon as he came in and he opened those doors, everybody stopped gambling, everybody froze. That was Nat Love. And then, of course, you have William Bill Pickett. He basically invented the modern rodeo, and he invented steer wrestling. You know, so to this day, when you watch a rodeo, I mean, this guy made rodeo wrestling, all the things and stunts that you see at rodeos. He made it fun. He made it something that people would want to come to, almost like a circus. And there used to be the Bill Pickett Rodeo that used to go to a lot of urban cities many years ago, up until I think the late 90s or early 2000s, and I'm not sure if they still have it, but they used to go to New York and Baltimore and Philadelphia, Washington. It was a great event. So William Bill Pickett. And of course, we've all heard of Buffalo Soldiers, but we don't know too much as far as how did they get started? What were they famous for? We know that they fought in World War I and then they were kind of disbanded, but I'm just going to give you a little bit of historical facts. I went to a book reading one time at the Schomburg Library, which is the Schomburg Library for Research in Black Culture. And the author, his grandfather was one of the Buffalo Soldiers, and he wrote this fantastic book. I mean, the whole audience at the Schomburg Auditorium just sat there, and he was so awe-inspiring. But I just want to tell you a few things about the Buffalo Soldiers. So after the Civil War, a lot of black men stayed in the military. We didn't call it military then, but they stayed in the army. There weren't a lot of opportunities, but here was something where they were getting a steady paycheck. They didn't have to deal with racism and discrimination. A lot of black men joined the Buffalo Soldiers because they would have a chance to start a new life, to go out west, and once again, not deal with racism and discrimination back in the South, where they were leaving plantations because the Civil War was over and slavery had ended. So they were comprised of what was called the 9th and 10th Cavalry. Those of you that are Western fanatics, you know from famous movies about Armstrong Custer, George Armstrong Custer. He was the 7th Cavalry out west, and you know he was killed during the Indian Wars at the Little Bighorn. But the 9th and 10th Cavalry were the black units of the Buffalo Soldiers. But what people don't know, during this time period of moving west, they really helped open up the West. It was the Buffalo Soldiers who put up all the telegraph lines for communication to go west of the Mississippi so that people could communicate with the East. It was the Buffalo Soldiers who did a lot of that. The wagon trains where people were given free land and they were going to go from east of the Mississippi to settle out west. It was the Buffalo Soldiers that escorted those wagon trains to protect them from Indians or Native Americans, as well as bandits and other things. The Buffalo Soldiers of the 9th and 10th Cavalry also acted like lawmen because in many of these territories, there was no law. So they chased Mexican bandits back into Mexico, and they apprehended people that were wanted for crimes. And this is a sad thing to say. I'm not really something I'm boasting about, but in Army war records, it's close to 40% of the engagements against Native Americans were done by the 9th and 10th Cavalry, the Buffalo Soldiers. And they were feared in many cases by many Native American tribes because they were great fighters, they were fearless. They were called Buffalo Soldiers because of their woolly hair, which was like afros. Obviously, they weren't going to a barbershop anywhere out west, so their hair was very woolly-like, and that's where that name Buffalo Soldiers came from. So, you know, in closing here, like I said, this is going to be short. The fact that a magazine and magazines like this are still being published and coming out with series of these magazines about how the West was won, and totally excluding black people at a time when critical race theory, which is a lie, is erasing things from American history, books being taken out of schools, taken out of school libraries. Students can't even do reports on things with black history. This is primarily happening in the southern states. The fact that someone can go into a Duane Reade, a Kroger's, a Publix, or whatever supermarket, and these magazines are there, reinforcing what I would say a whitewashing of history, is really disgraceful. So I don't know what you think about it. Like I said, I picked up the magazine wanting to not learn something but see what it was about, and then discovering that there were a series of this magazine, it was a little disturbing. So wanted to just throw that out here, and since it's Women's History Month, start with Stagecoach Mary. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Hope you learned something new tonight, and see you on my next episode.